OC World is made possible by the generous contributions of the Marisla Foundation, the Keith and Judy Swain Family Foundation, Orange County Community Foundation, the Cordoba Corporation, and viewers like you. Thank you.
We told you last week that census data shows that the population of California dropped by 500,000 people between April of 2020 and July of 2022.
You throw in crime, homelessness, high taxes, chronic educational decline, and you have a recipe for an exodus.
Hi, I'm Rick Reiff, guest hosting for OC World. Remember feudalism, kings, knights, monks, serfs? That was oh so long ago. But a couple of deep thinkers at Chapman University, Joel Kotkin and Marshall Toplansky, warned that society might be slipping back into something very much like those medieval times. They know a lot about the fiefdoms of California and Orange County, too. Joel Kotkin is a prolific writer focused on demographic, social, and economic trends. His books run the gamut from the birth of ancient cities to what America will be like decades from now. Marshall Toplansky is also well published, and his areas of expertise include marketing, leadership, management, entrepreneurship, and technology. Their collaborations include a think tank, Chapman Center for Demographics and Policy, and a podcast called the Feudal Future Podcast. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here at Chapman with you.
Thank you, Rick. It's great to be here.
So, Joel, let's get right into feudalism, and here is your recent book, now just out in paperback, The Coming of Neo-Feudalism, a warning to the global middle class. Explain, what is Neo-Feudalism?
Well, I don't think you have to look very far to see it. I mean, you take a look, let's say here in California in particular, which I write about quite a bit, which is middle class upward mobility is becoming harder and harder, particularly for younger people. We essentially have a society where young people really cannot achieve what their parents achieved. This is something pretty unique in American history, but it was not something that was unusual in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, upward mobility was actually the exception. So that's probably one of the biggest things that are consistent. And then, of course, we have, an era of crazy ideology, both on the right and the left. And again, the Middle Ages were full of people who embraced illogical ideas.
Well, what about, you also talk about the different stratas or classes of people. Right. Go back to the Middle Ages and what were kind of the different breakdowns, and what is the equivalent today?
Well, if you look at the society of the Middle Ages, there was at the very top was the aristocratic class. And today the aristocratic class are what I would call the tech oligarchs, the people at the top of Wall Street. And they are really the dominant factors in the society. And
so they were like the kings and the nobles back then.
Right, and they're increasingly a stagnant group in the sense that it's the same group of companies. We haven't had a major tech company emerge in a decade now, in terms of anything really large. We have domination of key markets by 80-90%. We have the consolidation of banking, which is now being even further accelerated. So that's your top group. Then you have, instead of the clergy, who were very powerful in the Middle Ages, we have what I call the clerisy, university professors, media people, the nonprofit world. And they've become very, very powerful and very influential, and particularly influential during the pandemic and also in defining the climate change issues. And then there's this sort of the class of the middle class, or the non-elites, some of whom are middle class, and that middle class is being just pummeled.
Now, in the Middle Ages, would that have been like the guilds and the craftsmen?
Right, the guilds, craftsmen, the person who owned their own farm. That was basically that. And then, of course, you had the serf class. The big change in American society and Western societies is we used to have a big middle class who owned property, could start a business, had some autonomy. Increasingly, that class is becoming, and particularly their children, are becoming permanent serfs. Always going to be renting, never really be secure, won't ever really have much in the way of assets.
And who's in that middle class? Is that like small business people or?
Small business who have been consistently hurt and were particularly hurt during the pandemic, where the rules really favored the big companies and really hurt the small ones.
Boy, that's Marshall. Are you as dreary in your outlook as Joel?
Well, I'm a big believer in innovation and in entrepreneurship as a way of kind of getting out of all of this. But yeah, I'm a little concerned about it. We're in a very strange place. Orange County is actually a great example of this. If you look at the world in general, the people who are in advanced industries, there are a basket of like 50 different industry segments that qualify as advanced industries, according to Brookings Institution. They make about 4 times the median income of everybody else.
So what kind of person might that be?
Oh, that
for
could be a
example?
software engineer. It could be a person who's some kind of quantitatively oriented person.
Okay.
It could be actually a manufacturing person in a advanced science-based industry.
Yeah.
Those people are making a lot more money than everybody else. They're the only people that can afford.
Like roughly, what right now nowadays?
What percentage of?
No. What are they making? 150
Well,
a year?
figure the median income for a household in Orange County, or in the United States, about $60,000.
Okay.
Orange County, of course, is a little higher because it's a more expensive place to live. And we're talking about people that are making $200,000 or more. So we're finding that it's becoming more and more polarized in narrower and narrower geographies where these people are living. And so if you are not living in a place that's attracting that kind of group, it's very hard for you to make a living in today's society. So what are you supposed to do? It's hard to break it. The only alternative is to create a business or to create a skill of some kind, just like the guilds in the Middle Ages, where you can actually maybe start to eke your way out of that. And we're making it harder and harder for people to do that, especially in California.
And there's a demographic aspect, which is particularly true in Orange County, which is only us older guys or older people are going to be able to can afford homes. There's not a successive generation, and a lot of older people are going to age in place. So what we're finding is, in a funny way, Orange County is becoming the new Hawaii. It's a place where you have a large number of older, well-to-do people and a lot of servants.
It's a great place to be if you can afford to retire there.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm sure you've seen, when I'm driving PCH, which I get to do because I live in Laguna Beach, but going by Emerald Bay,
Right.
Every morning, 7:30, there is a line of trucks, service trucks. These are people that are going into Emerald Bay to, service things, and it's really, it's its own little eco-economy. And they're sitting there in these trucks, and I'm sure they've all come from the Inland Empire. And they're hard workers, they're gardeners, they're carpenters, you name it, air conditioning, making deliveries. What does that say about this construct we have right now?
Well, basically what we're doing is we're not creating upwardly mobile jobs. These are jobs that are part-time very often. They don't pay all that well. They're also, of course, very susceptible to being automated, a lot of these jobs, eventually. So, the problem is that we have people at the top who do very, very well, and then people who serve them, but not a lot of growth in the middle.
So why is, because that is almost counter to the American dream. We've always had the thing that has made America great is upward mobility.
Right.
And why has that gone away?
Well, I would think particularly in California, the regulatory situation is very difficult to start and maintain a business. Like I was thinking, California has pushed all the things so that we have, the demand for EVs, the batteries, but none of it is going to be built in California. Outside of Musk's original plan.
Okay, so I'm going along Laguna Beach and I see the trucks lined up, and there are gardeners and everything else, and it's Joel, what do you make of this phenomenon?
Well, this is really very much a sort of feudal society where there's the landowners who have, in many cases, Newport Coast, you're just not a successful middle-class person can't live in Newport Coast, put it that way, unless they rob banks. So what you have is you have very high-end people and then a huge service population. These are jobs that don't pay particularly well, are not going to necessarily lead to anything else, and are very subject to being automated out of existence.
Well, if you think about that, I can't think of a better example of neo-feudalism, actually,
Right.
because if you think about feudal society, you had the bulk of people were there serving the duke or the king or the landowner, and this is exactly the same thing.
I will say, though, these workers, most of them Hispanic,
Right.
and I mean, hardworking, great attitudes. Most of them are like, they've gotten a new truck, or they've added a second truck, or they're beginning to hire people and they're building up businesses. To me, I see some promise there that is really, a potential bright side.
A question is, where are they going to live? And of course, for many of them, as you mentioned, they would tend to be living in the Inland Empire, sometimes with very long commutes.
And the state is not making it easier for them.
No.
No, the state is making it very complicated for them to do more than just be their own individual sole proprietor.
One thing, just the
minute they
price
try
of
to hire
gasoline,
somebody,
what the
right.
price of gasoline does to somebody who has to make a commute like that.
Gasoline regulation, if they want to grow their business and they want to add employees, oh my God, the regulatory nightmare they have to go through in California to do that. So a lot of people are moving out.
I talked to a guy who, got roofs, a real estate owner, and he says the new roofs are going to be much more expensive, which means there's going to be less roofing. That's one of those professions that, could lead to the middle class. Basically, unless you're a tech oligarch or in the extremely high end, California makes it very, very difficult for you.
So, and I guess some of the proof is in the pudding, right? Population numbers. And we've heard now that for the last several years, there's been out-migration out of California and many other, if you will, blue states, to make it, I hate to make it totally a political thing, but out-migration from big blue states to big red states. And we just have now some new data from the census. Joel, why don't you talk about that and what that shows?
Well, Orange County is sort of not gaining population. We're not losing as badly as LA County is, but we're definitely losing. And then when we've looked into who's moving, that's the scariest part, because the people who are moving have been, for the last 3-4 years, 35 to 54 middle class people. That's who's leaving.
Well, and look at where they're going. There's only one county in California that's actually gaining population, Riverside County. And why? Housing prices are lower. Middle class people have more of a shot of being able to make a living. And the thing to keep in perspective is it's hard to appreciate why this decline in population is so important. This is the first time since 1849 that California has lost population. Places that lose population don't tend to do well economically.
Yeah, it's unprecedented. And it's not just in California, though. I mean, if you looked at the areas in the latest census data, the 4 biggest losers in the nation: Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, and Chicago. Okay, and they all were down about 1%. The biggest gainers, guess where? Orlando, Dallas, San Antonio, Charlotte, and Houston, all up around 2%. Now, Joe, this is what I got in Los Angeles Times. Let me give them a hard time. They cited, first of all, they stressed that this trend slowed this time, that it was a slowing in the out-migration. And they quoted unnamed demographic experts stressed the reduced rate of loss, that there were still lingering effects from COVID, and that there could be a rebound for LA coming up in the next one. Now, Joel, you've been referred to by the New York Times as America's Uber demographer. So do you agree with those demographic?
Well, first of all, somebody really needs to take a statistics class. One, the out-migration has been going on now from before COVID. So to say that everything was related to COVID is just wrong. What happened was we had COVID, there was an acceleration of outmigration. But now we're still seeing the outmigration. Now it was obvious. It's obvious that what's happening is the growth is going somewhere else. I don't know where else. And what I would lead to is what would lead to a big resurgence of population to LA County. I can't see what it could possibly be that would lead people there, given the economics, which are not good, the crime situation, the deterioration of the schools, if that's at all possible. I just don't. I think that if you don't look at 1 year to 1 year, there's no question that the pandemic was an unusual situation. But the reality is that before the pandemic and now after the pandemic, the same pattern is there. The LA Times, the New York Times will continue to fool themselves and continue to think that everything's going to be great, but that's just not happening. I mean, we've had this discussion with the California political and economic establishment about outmigration for years. They just don't want to hear it.
Yeah, Marshall, I want to ask you about that. When you give your speeches and when you're talking to thought leaders and corporations and public officials about what's going on, what kind of a reaction? Do they just kind of nod, thank you very much? Or, I mean, do any lights go on, or is everybody
Crickets.
in denial? Or critics, okay, well.
I find that the business people get it.
Yeah, that's right.
Business people see it happening in front of their very eyes. They know that the business climate here in California is just getting worse. That it's not just overregulation, which is what people tell us in surveys, business people tell us in surveys is the problem, or taxes. It's a contentious adversarial relationship between the state of California and businesses that is driving businesses to leave.
And I think
And the businesses are also saying, where are my workers supposed to live? If I expand here in California, I'm guaranteed to make my current employees unhappy. If I expand in Nashville or I expand in Texas, they're going to be able to afford a house and it'll be fine. So on the margin, that's what they're doing.
And that's the exact opposite of the way it used to be, which is if you were a California company, you didn't want to go anywhere else because you'd lose your people. Now the older employees who bought their homes 20 or 30 years ago, they can stay. But the younger ones,
How about just in general, the Silicon Valley still seems to be doing pretty well, isn't it?
But we're going through a moment in Silicon Valley where we're seeing a lot of layoffs. But if you look at places in the country that have a lot of advanced employment and a lot of advanced industries that can pay a lot, Silicon Valley is doing very well. But interestingly, Austin has come up quite a bit. They're the number one grower in terms of these advanced industries. Silicon Valley is relatively flat. Orange County, which used to be actually in the top 10 of hubs of advanced industries, is consistently dropping and is among I think it's number 40 out of 50 in terms of growth in advanced jobs, and it's negative growth.
All right, so here we are, and we've been dumping quite a bit on the business climate in California. But, Californians are voting for the government that they have. And I think a lot of these regulations, you may argue it's bad for business, but people say, I want clean air, I want clean water, I want to be safe. That's why we have to have these regulations. Just in Laguna Beach, my hometown, they just banned balloons. You can't have balloons or even Mylar balloons because they might get into the water. And I think most people in Laguna are fine with that. That's great. Let's not have balloons anymore because we don't want to kill any, life in the ocean. So, Joel, isn't there, and let's face it, Gavin Newsom now is doing a tour of red states where he's propounding the freedom of California. California is the place where people are free, whether it's reproductive rights or gender identity or anything.
But if you're a doctor, if you're a doctor who disagrees with CDC, you could be California passed a law that made that something that you would be liable. You could lose your license. California is a state where cancel culture is at a very high level.
But are we at a point then it just depends on how you look at it? What's freedom? for instance, if you're looking at reproductive rights, you're going to say California is as free as can be. And if you're looking at, speech, you might say California is not so hot. But are we at this point? And, is it a tipping point?
Well, I think we're at a tipping point in California in that although we have enormous inertia that will keep us going for a while, new people are not coming here. That's the big thing. We're not getting new people here. Companies are not locating here. As I mentioned, all the new, even the green industries are locating elsewhere. Semiconductors are locating elsewhere. So even if America reshores, as it should and needs to do, it's not going to happen here. And so what's happened in California is we continue to have the very high-end jobs, some of them, although some of it, of the momentum is being lost. But we're not creating middle-class jobs, and therefore what kind of society do we end up with? We end up with a feudal society, because that's what you end up with.
So Marshall, bring us back from the brink. Is there anything we can do? Do you have any suggestions? Is this irreversible? Are we doomed to become all serfs and either lucky royalty or lowly serfs, or is there some hope here?
I think there is actually some hope. I think there are some very tangible things that we can do. First, we can go through and streamline regulations so it makes it easier for businesses to grow and to start. We can train people in technical and, let's call it, kind of vocational technologies to be able to give them the skills that we need to foster in order to be able to have people to work on our infrastructure of heating and air conditioning and things like that. We can be a little less strident when it comes to using the legal system to bollocks up development projects. Today we have tons and tons of regulations on the books for environmental protection, but it goes overboard in how we actually do it, right? If you're a builder and you're trying to create housing for people, even middle class housing, you have to go through tremendous amounts of secret reviews and things like that. We can say, look, how about one secret review, not 15,000 of them.
And we just saw today, I saw an announcement that a big development in Riverside County, 9,000 homes being tossed out on an environmental basis.
So there's actually a lot that can be done. We can make education for Polytechnic free, for instance, which would be very interesting. A lot of countries have done that and have seen a lot of development that way. So the other question is kind of the environmental area of energy. Right now, we're totally focused on renewable, and with the idea of reducing emissions. Great goal, but how you get there is as important as where you're going to get. So if we can have a little bit more of a balance between, say, lower polluting fossil fuels like natural gas, taking up the slack while we're getting to renewables, maybe people will have more money in their pocket to be able to actually to survive.
Or you could use nuclear. I mean, the big issue is California is in a mad virtue signaling campaign. We're clean, we're clean. Well, it's global warming. It's not California warming. And so when you chase people and businesses out of California, their carbon emissions go up. Like, let's just say if I move to Houston tomorrow, my carbon emissions will go up just because if I live in Houston, I've got to run the air conditioner for 6 months a year. If a business can't compete in California and they move to Texas, they move to Arizona, they move to China, where the things are powered largely by coal, I think you would have a negative effect. So we've calculated that actually our policies are actually doing absolutely nothing, because when people move out, industry moves out, we'd be better off to be building EVs in South LA than we are building EVs in Dallas. But we're not going to do that because California is obsessed with its image. It's not obsessed with actually making something better. It's all kabuki. It's all trying to impress people and impress themselves, most importantly.
It seems like there's almost a division now among states about those that want to say, look what we're doing, and those that say, look what we stand for.
Exactly.
And California is big on what we stand for. We are for this, for that, but the results don't seem to be there. But again, I don't see, especially, and maybe Marshall, you can address this issue when it comes to millennials. I think they love the California approach. They love it, and I think they.
But they leave when they're
and they
over
would
30.
probably agree with the neo-feudalism, but the way that a millennial or even a Gen Z would solve this problem of neo-feudalism, if they believe it, is much different than what you guys are proposing.
Well, the concern I have about millennials is that they're not old enough yet to have a real stake in their own mind. They don't own anything. They don't feel as though they have a commitment to a place. They have a commitment to an ideal from a philosophical point of view, but they don't have a commitment to a place. And once they develop that and they start getting into family formation time period in their lives, maybe buying a house, I have a sneaking suspicion that we may see millennials come
so
up.
they may change.
There's a very interesting study that Sam Abrams just did at AEI where he said that
That's the American Enterprise Institute. Another think tank.
Right. But what Sam came up with is that actually the people in red states were worried that people from California would drive their politics to the left. Turns out it's driving their politics to the right.
The people who are moving.
The
from
people moving from California are more Republican than the Texans. Are voting, and I think it's because they see what's happened around them. They see what's happened in their schools. They see what's happened in the economies, and they see what's happened in the housing market, and they say, this isn't working for me, and I'm going to go somewhere else.
We're just about out of time now, so just for one last, and almost like a quick yes or no, and we didn't have enough time to get into AI. So much talk now about artificial intelligence. Overall, are you an optimist or a pessimist about where artificial intelligence is going to take us?
Huge optimist with a big red flag that says, be careful, it could backfire a little bit. But I think the ultimate benefit to society will be huge.
Okay.
I'm less enthusiastic about it, but I think it's inevitable. And anybody talking about, well, we should not do it in 6 months, as Marshall mentioned before the interview started, he said, I don't think the Chinese are going to take a break.
Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you so much. And neo-feudalism at better bookstores and Amazon everywhere, right? One of those big tech companies, those oligarchs, right? All right. So very good. And gentlemen, it's been really a great pleasure. And thank you for watching OC World.